What up, friends? This isn't you. Put down the phone. Give me a doll. And today we're going to be reviewing Artemis's debut album, Dall. Like I said before, this is the debut album by K-pop girl group Artemis. Artemis is actually composed of former members of the K-pop group LOONA. After some tumultuous contract and management issues following the departure of LOONA member Chu, the group members kind of just went their own ways for a little while. They went off and did their own projects. However, 5 of the original LOONA members actually formed together again to create Artemis, and this project in particular is actually very reminiscent of the LOONA sound. Some songs here and there actually even showcased a bit more of an experimental, darker sound, which is kind of different for the members of this group, so I was excited to see where they would go with that. I was also interested in seeing how this newfound freedom from their former agency would actually impact their sound and their music as a whole. Unfortunately though, the experimentality of that pre-release single that I really liked doesn't really represent this album on the whole all that much. While some songs are fairly pleasant, the album actually feels fairly by the numbers and unmemorable. Funnily enough, the intro URL probably has one of the best instrumentals on the project despite not representing the project at all. It has a funk-driven dance cadence which is super nice, especially when those sort of plucky guitars, synths, and drums all mesh together in harmony. It kind of feels straight out of a 90s club, like this one rules for how short it is. The first real track on the album, Virtual Angel, is honestly not really anything to write home about. The beat has a light and twinkling synth-pop sound to it, and the vocals also match this energy, having a sort of delicate yet driving atmosphere to them. However, it just doesn't really do much more than that, and making it end up kind of feel ordinary overall. It's at least somewhat vibrant and full though, and I also find the lyrics about confiding in or finding a virtual angel to basically give you joy online. It's a pretty interesting lyrical concept, and it's sort of reminiscent of what an artist like Grimes might do. The instrumental really just doesn't live up to this theme though. Sparkle is definitely one of the better songs on the project though, having a two-step inspired drum kit as its beats, alongside creating these sort of distorted guitar passages that add a pretty mesmerizing atmosphere to the song. I love how the instrumental is just fluttering all over the place, creating a very dreamy vibe, and the vocal samples also create a very lush sound to this one. I'm also loving the bass here, and the progression on the track overall is smooth yet driving at the same time. It always feels like there's something new to catch in the instrumental as you're listening to it. Granted, getting too maximalist might be a bit of a problem, but this song is kind of what I like, how we have all these different instrumentals going on in the background, and we can kind of focus on each one to find something new. The vocals are also smooth and punchy, matching the lyrics about finding a spark between two people and how it feels like fireworks. The next track, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is probably the worst song on the album, to be honest, and it feels really dated for the modern pop scene. The instrumental has this generic dance sound that just does nothing for me, especially when that chorus kicks in and it kind of sounds like a Chainsmokers reject or something. That's just not good. The vocals don't really reach the highs that I feel like they should for a track like this, and they almost feel a bit overpowered by the instrumental at times too, and even the lyrics doesn't really save this song either because it's not really doing anything with the book theme that this song takes its name from. It just kind of feels like a sort of dated and gimmicky song overall that just doesn't have anything meshed together all that well, even if the sort of clock ticking effect on the pre-chorus actually is pretty cool. Flower Rhythm is another one of the better songs on the project, delivering a bit more of an experimental and modern synth pop and dance sound. The glitchy and jittery synths kind of reinforce the sort of virtual and technological angle that I feel like a song like Virtual Angel was trying to do. It's very spacey overall, and I also like how the vocals provide a melodic touch that grounds the instrumental and song overall. The beat is fun and punchy, and while the lyrics are a bit generic, they still pair fairly well with the instrumental in creating a sort of otherworldly feeling. Candy Crush is the only song that actually follows in the footsteps of the intro, making it one of the best songs on the project. This is a city pop song through and through with elegant and smooth guitar tones and bass passages as well. The sort of like synthy woodwind flourishes on here are great, and man, that chorus is just really nice. It's ethereal, and the horn segments on this song too do a great job at showcasing the sort of nightlife atmosphere that they're trying to create here. The lyrics also elevate the imagery to this track, detailing this sort of vibrant nightlife alongside these silhouettes and curious people just kind of going about their daily lives. It also reinforces the sort of spacey concept as well by putting a big focus on the stars on the lyrics here too. Unfortunately, we kind of go back to the generic pop and contemporary R&B territory with the next song, Air. The verses on this one are super simple, and while they do retain a bit of the horn segment flourishes from the previous track, they're just not enough to actually carry this very bare bones instrumental. The pre-chorus actually has a fairly nice swell of all the song's elements, however, the chorus itself is just kind of limp, and all it really does is add a few more synth and horn segments, and it just isn't really enough to hold my attention. The next track, UNF Air, is basically just an even more stripped back version of the previous song, and I just don't really know why they would do that. The beat on this one is a super preppy and light sound, almost reminiscent of something like Ed Sheeran's Shape of You, which is not really something you want to emulate, in my opinion. There's just nothing going on here, and while the chorus does get a bit better, I guess, it's basically the equivalent of putting some sugar on white bread, so I don't know how much that helps. Actually, this song is kind of everything that I don't like about the modern pop and contemporary R&B scene kind of rolled into one. The darker and echoing tone on Distress actually does help elevate it a little bit from the other weaker tracks on the record, even if it is a bit too sparse for its own good. The snap beat is just overdone, but sometimes they do throw in some real drums on the beat for this one, and it does get a bit better when they do. The chorus especially is a pretty nice moment, I have to say, when all these instruments kind of swell together, and I'm also really digging the electro bass on this part too. The instrumentals and the vocals on the chorus help create a really smooth groove to the track that is kind of unlike a lot of the other more R&B driven songs on the project. However, the fact that the verses don't really follow this trend kind of kills the song's momentum, unfortunately. Butterfly Effect is another instance of the track's general vibe being alright, but there's just not much going on here. There's a standard pop beat and progression, the synths and the background vocals kind of lift up the song a bit, but not by much. However, again, the chorus does actually hit a bit harder when all of these instruments swell and kind of create this airy and dreamy vibe that I feel like the album was banking on overall. Actually, it's kind of a trend on this record where the choruses are pretty nice, but the verses are just kind of weak. The final track on the record, Birth, is the pre-release single that I was talking about, and it's still the best song on the album. If the group didn't want to go into the city pop and synth funk direction that was explored on the intro track and Candy Crush, this is the sound that I wanted them to go for. It actually kind of reminds me of Purple Kiss's Ponzona era, having this theatrical darkness that is pretty uncommon in the modern K-pop scene. The progression on this track is also pretty experimental, and I'm also really digging how the strings and the harsh synths combine to create this sort of like ethereal horror atmosphere. The vocals are also really good on this track, really devoting themselves to the mystical and dark direction that this song took. Even the beat switch into this sort of drum and bass segment actually feels right at home for this record, especially since it largely tries to at least somewhat deal with the sort of technological themes that earlier tracks were sort of going for. That rigid vibe that the drum and bass beat brings helps tie it back into the synthetic themes of the project. The acoustic guitar on the outro also really feels like a fitting curtain close for this very theatrical ending song. This song's sick, and I really wish that this was kind of the sound that they were more committed to. Unfortunately, if you couldn't tell, Artemis' debut album was kind of a mixed bag. A lot of the more interesting elements on these tracks are largely undercut by being over pretty generic pop and contemporary R&B beats. And even within that, the truly good songs on the record largely don't really have much to do with each other. The lyrics, while okay, largely use the same subject matter to express the same themes, making them feel kind of inconsequential overall. The album is largely inoffensive, and only one or two tracks actually stand out as being kind of bad. However, in a way, that's kind of the problem. Other than the more lush songs like URL and Candy Crush, and the more experimental tracks like Flower Rhythm and Birth, the album is just kind of unmemorable. The vocals are fine as well, and even the more generic songs have at least one or two interesting elements to them, but the album feels very muddled in what it wants to be, and unfortunately ends up committing more to the generic aspects of it rather than the more experimental and interesting ones. In the future, especially for sort of K-pop veterans like Artemis with their experiences in LOONA, I really think they need to start honing in on a certain sound, whether that be the lush and vibrant sound of Candy Crush, or the more experimental and dark side of Birth. I feel like one of these two would make them stand out a lot more in the K-pop scene, especially with the experiences that they already do have and the skills that they already do have. All in all though, I am feeling a light 5 on Artemis' debut album. Of course, you just have to talk about album covers on this show, and I think this album cover's okay. It's kind of in the standard K-pop girl group vein of just having all the girls on the cover, very pastel-y and pink and light, kind of representing the airy and sort of ethereal nature of the sounds and lyrics on the record. It's not really doing anything too crazy. You know, you see a lot of groups do this stuff. LOONA even did something like this before. Cherry Bullet does this too when they were releasing albums. So it's not exactly unique, but it does at least fit the vibe of the project. But of course, those are just my thoughts on this debut album by Artemis. What did you guys think? Do you think this lives up to the hype from the LOONA days of old? Do you think this is a good next step for some of these members? Or were you kind of hoping for something a little bit more with the experience that these girls have? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, or I'll launch you into the sun. And until the next one, farewell.